Welcome everyone to another episode of Kiwi Talks. My guest today is a veteran video games artist who has worked on games such as Age of Empires 3 and The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess HD. I'd like to welcome this veteran, Emily McGregor. How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for taking time out to talk to me.
Good.
And you're putting your feet up with your coffee. It's good.
I sure am. Early morning. I'm getting into it.
So I suppose, given the plethora of skills that you have, in terms of being an artist, what would you say is the most difficult? Is it the sculpting? Is it the modeling? Is it the texturing?
The most difficult. I think it's just you never stop learning. Art is one of those things that you just constantly trying to find like new mediums or new processes. Especially in video games, there always seems to be something new that's come up, like it's sort of a new program that's been invented, or it's like, oh, there's an update to the engine that you're using. So if you're using Unreal and a new version comes out, you've got to learn that. So I'd say it's probably one of the hardest, but also one of the most interesting as well, because you're always trying to push your skills to be on that cutting edge.
Yeah, for sure. So is there particular websites you follow, or is it just kind of being chucked in the deep end and then you learn it?
Yeah, it's a lot of self-taught. Like I think like when you're at uni, you get like the basics and that's good, and everyone could go through, here's how you do all the things. But then after that, you're on your own. So YouTube is like endless hours of tutorials on there now, which is great. That wasn't really available when I was studying, but I think for students now, that's like probably one of the best. ArtStation.
Oh, yes.
Also on like Level 80. It's another website that's, just has anything that's got lots of tutorials or forums where people are sort of like sharing ideas.
Yeah. So are you able to, if you play a video game, are you able to enjoy it, or do you start looking at the artwork and picking it apart and thinking, I would do this differently, or I could make this better?
It does depend how well the game's done. I think if the game is a bit unpolished, I would definitely start picking it apart. If you start looking at things like, there's a big seam in that rock, or like what's going on, the lighting's going on weird. But I think the sign of a good game is when I can get really lost in it. If I can get really immersed and I'm not thinking about work at all, like I think, they've done it really well.
Because you can spend so much time on the most minuscule thing, can't you? When it comes to artwork, like even as you said, like a rock, for example, you could spend so much time just on one rock, and you never get. Do you ever get tedious with it? It's like, I'm overdoing this rock, or are you just always like, nah, I'm going to make this the best rock possible? Obviously,
I think a lot of artists do want to do that. We tend to narrow in, like, especially if you're making, like, say, if you're just looking at the one rock on your screen, it's huge. So to you, it's everything. It's like, I'm going to make this perfect. It's great. And then someone says it in the game and it's this tiny little thing in the background. So I think like the longer I've been in video games, it's sort of about balancing how you do that detail and sort of like where is good to put your time. Especially now, like I'm moving into management, so I'm sort of helping like the younger artists look for those ways as well. It's like, it's good to spend that much time on that. It's going to have that level of detail, but it's probably best to spend it on like the gun or something that's going to be like really close and upfront for the player.
Yeah, because I've heard that it's all about planning in advance with any type of modeling, like even with a 3D model, and it's all about deconstructing it and turning it into shapes, right? Like if you're referencing, say, a Google image and you're looking at it and how to break it down into shapes, is that a method that you really follow?
Yeah, it depends whether you're doing environments or characters as well, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, you definitely sort of look at like the whole thing before you start and just sort of break it down and be like, all right, what bit can I do in which program? Even like, so you might do a lot of sculpting in say like ZBrush or Maya or Blender, but then you might do a lot of the details in Substance, which is just like a painting program. So there's a lot of different ways that you can add detail now at different stages.
Mm. So with gaming studios, do they kind of try and get you to do a lot of different things? So if you're working on a character model, then after you finish that character model, they might move you into doing something environmental based. Or do you tend to only be focused in on one specific area?
Yeah, usually you specialize.
Yeah.
So like artists will be like a specific thing, like I'm a character artist or I'm an environment artist. And a lot of studios will have like teams of those sort of people. The really small teams, though, like if you're on a little indie game that's, you know, it's only got like 2 people working on it, then everyone does everything. Yeah, you might end up doing the audio as well and the UI and things like that. So mostly, yeah, it comes down to team size.
Yeah. Oh, well, do you prefer smaller teams or bigger teams?
I think I've done quite a range. I think the bigger teams are good. Like I really like how much you can get done. Like when you can get a whole big team together, it's quite rewarding to get like a really big project.
So how big was the team when you worked on Twilight Princess, Zelda, Twilight Princess HD? Was that a big team? Was it a small team?
It was sort of a medium-sized team, I guess. I think there was about maybe 10 programmers, and then it was a few artists, and then we outsourced all the artwork to another company that was near us as well. So I was running the outsourcing with them. And so that was about another 20 artists.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And how did that go? Were you just in a meeting and the announcement just came out of nowhere? Like, oh, you guys will be doing the HD version of Twilight Princess. How did that actually come about? Do you remember?
Usually, so the studio that I was at then did a lot of ports. So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Tantalus.
usually games that, yeah, you take one game and turn it into something for another console. And so we would be constantly pitching. So you're always just like writing like pitch decks that are just like a slideshow or something like that you can send to someone and go, hey, we can take your game and make it awesome for whatever reason. So usually like sending those pictures out to people. And then when you get one back, that's when you can start working on it or you start a deal, something like that. And I think my boss at the time already had a relationship with Nintendo. So he already had quite a few conversations with them already. And yeah, we did the pitch and we got it. It's usually like a few studios are going for it at the same time. So you might be up
right.
other places. Yeah. So you're going like, oh, we can do it for this much, or we can do this level of detail, that sort of thing.
Because how do you work out the budgeting in terms of that, right? So like say with Twilight Princess, how did you know what would be required and how long it would take? And working out a budget from that, knowing that obviously you're competing against other studios as well.
Yeah, I think it's something that it does take a lot of time, I think, like just like being in the industry for a long time and knowing like how long things take and that sort of thing. So our managers there, the studio directors put together the budget sort of based on estimates. Like you'd have a chat to the programmers and the artists and be like, so how long would this sort of thing take? And, you pretty much have to guess a lot of stuff. Like it's educated guesses, but a lot of it's like, well, we've done this before. How long would this artwork take? Or how long would this particular part of the program take to, rewire?
Oh, okay.
And then, yeah, how many people? And so it's quite an involved process to sort of work out, like, what are the sort of projected costs that it might be?
Yeah, because you don't want to you do want to avoid a situation where you have crunch, where you've given a deadline for that amount of money and then for whatever reason, because curveballs always happen with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
As you know, so it would be very hard to try and work out where that line is, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think it just does keep evolving over lots of projects. Like the first pitch that you do, maybe you get that wrong, maybe you find out, oh, you actually have to do a lot of overtime if you want to do it for that budget or that amount of people.
Yeah. So with Twilight Princess HD, was there something specifically that was the most difficult to do or that kind of caught you off guard?
it wasn't a particularly difficult project. I think the only frustrating thing was that we were only changing the textures, not the models. So because it was such an old game, all of the models are still quite blocky.
Yes, that's right.
And then you're putting these lovely new textures on them. So it's like trying to make that look right. So if you've got a mountain that's all square, but then you put a nice HD texture on it, it doesn't quite gel as good as if you could have just updated the geometry a little bit as well.
Was that ever considered to update the character models as well, or was it?
Yeah, so that was all part of the original sort of agreement, that it was just like, yep, just the textures, the UI, and also making it work. So a lot of the programming was fixed up as well. A lot of the bugs were taken out, because as soon as you port it to a new console, it's going to have a lot of bugs and things like that. So ironing all that out.
So would you work in conjunction with the programmers from an artist standpoint? Because I'm not exactly sure how this works, but if you change textures or you start upgrading textures, that can start messing with the programming and the coding sometimes, can't it?
Yeah, because you're working with an old game, so you're working with old code. As soon as you try and update that, lots of different things happen. So as soon as you touch one thing, it sort of like unravels. Like, oh, okay, so now we've got to fix this bit, and then we've got to fix that bit.
Right. So a domino effect of problems.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds horrible.
So like if you're starting a game, there's sort of a difference between the ports, I guess, and like a new game. Because if you're starting one from scratch, you know, like, oh, I'm going to use this particular art. We know we've got this level that we're aiming to, like say you're aiming to like Xbox or PC. You sort of know from the start where you're going to be. But with an old game, there's a lot of unknowns, because you've got to start taking it apart and going like, oh, is this still going to work when we put it back together? Like,
so how long does that take? Because obviously you'd have to do all that stuff first and plan it in accordance with that when you start adding in finer details in terms of textures.
I think overall that project was about 1.5 years.
1.5 years?
Yeah.
And it was just upgrades of textures?
So that was, the textures, the updated programming, UI, and also the controls.
Yes.
Yeah, because it was going from a controller to then being able to use like the Wii controllers as well.
That makes sense. So would you focus on one area at a time? So like say you and your team, you do one area and then move on to the next area and then the next area. Is that how it's done, or is it all over the place and you're working on multiple things at different times, or every specific artist?
Yeah, it is a lot of multiple things. You'd probably have like the programming and the engineers would be working on like specific areas, like they'll be working on a lot of gameplay sort of areas and control and things like that. If we need them to work on anything first, like sometimes the programmers will have to write programs so we can get the textures in, things like that. Like there's a lot of times where the artists can't start straight away.
So what are the artists doing while they're waiting for that?
So yeah, that's time like where you'd be doing concept or things like that, or sort of planning, looking through like, the different areas of the game. Would also be trying to, take apart what is there, like making sure we don't miss anything, sort of organizing it all in the background before we can get started. And then, we sort of break it down into different areas after that. So I had like one whole biome. It was like a sort of desert area. And that was like the area that I was working on for a while. It was like just mine. So I would make sure that, it was all right. But another artist might have, or like the forest little town area. So they just spend like a month making that look good. It sort of helps having an artist on one area sometimes, because they sort of know the whole thing and they can make it really consistent, like get a good look over that whole area.
Is there certain areas or certain, I suppose, environmental things that are more difficult to do than others? Like sand would be very different to water. That would be very different to ice.
Mm.
Mm.
They all have their own challenges. Like these days, there is so much more we can do now. Like the things you can do on PC and Xbox now with environments is amazing. But yeah, back then, like had to do a lot of tricks. I think like sort of early days of sort of consoles. Yeah, a lot of it is illusion. Like you try to find all these like tricky ways to like create particle effects and things like that because the computers weren't as powerful. So there's not as much realism that you can put into the graphics.
Mm.
So probably water was one of the most difficult. And making water look right. Because you don't have access to, a lot of those sort of like really nice shaders that we see now where everything's like, oh, you've got all this beautiful subsurface and it was sort of more like just like flat planes or you'd have like, just like see-through bits. It was quite basic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you were doing a port of something that was, say, done in Unreal Engine 3 or something, that would be a lot easier to do. Would it, because of the engine that it's on and the different tools you can utilize to make it better or cleaner?
Yeah, definitely. It'd be a much simpler process to sort of bring something from an old Unreal into new Unreal. There's sort of a lot you could do there to really jazz it up. But when you're using something like on Zelda, for example, all the engine was written just for that game. So a lot of it too is like figuring out how it works.
Right. And does Nintendo actually give you a lot of the tools, or do you actually have to work it out on your own?
Yeah,
you know how secretive they are. So
they're pretty secretive. But yeah, we have a lot of chats with them as well. So if anyone was around who worked on the original one, we would have meetings with them as well, so the engineers could talk to each other and be like, oh, how did that bit actually work? How do we redo that?
Yeah. Because you guys did so many ports, I mean, you must gained so much knowledge in terms of all the different companies and what their work ethic and the way they do their engineering and artwork and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, you do end up with quite a good knowledge of like all the different ones, I guess. So it's probably why companies will pitch to the same one a lot as well. Because it's like, oh, we've worked with them before. Like, like we worked with Microsoft and we're like, oh, we know how that works. We know where the people are there, So it's quite good to be able to just roll onto another project with the same people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, were you aware that Tantalus was known for ports and all that when you first joined them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I joined almost straight out of uni. I was at another place, Firemint, doing phone games.
Oh, yes.
For about almost a year, and then went over to Tantalus.
That's a bit of a jump, isn't it? Phone games to full studio games.
Yeah, because I was new to the industry as well. I was like, oh, I want to try doing different things, and and phone games were not what we think back then either, because this was like early 2008. I think.
Oh yeah, very, very different time.
I'm making like phone games for like Nokias and stuff. Like the screens were like this big. Yeah.
So when you first joined Tantalus, was it a lot of just chuck you in the deep end and here you go, learn?
A little bit, but it was a pretty big studio when I joined. So there was lots of other artists that I could learn from.
Yeah.
So I had an art director, lead artist, and a few other people. So even being a junior, like there was a lot of room to sort of be like given a task that's not too like high pressure. So sort of given like a learning task, like here's this one, like paint this texture. I was working on a pony game at the time, so I was like just painting a lot of accessories and stuff for the horses and coming up with ideas for that.
Right. So do you brainstorm in advance Like you get what you're, I mean, you get a task to do, and then you kind of brainstorm in your head how you're going to go about doing the task, or do you just do it and then as you're doing it, you're kind of working out what you did wrong and what you're doing right?
Yeah, you usually want to work it out from the start. Like you'll have like sort of like you'd have a brief from your lead artist usually. So it's like this is the sort of thing we want. Like maybe there would be room to move within that one. Like the pony one that I was doing was sort of pretty open. It was just like, oh, we need costumes for the horses, you know, so people can unlock different things. So it had a bit of free reign to just make up things in there. But then you might have tasks where it's like, we need this specific gun, and you have to make that. And you've got pictures, reference of it, and you're like, okay, cool, make that. And there's not really any room to move within that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. As simple as that, is it?
I don't know. Sometimes it's good when you get simple tasks like that. And then, sometimes you get really complex ones that might take you like a week to figure out. It's like, oh, how are we going to do this particular particle system? Like, how are we going to make a waterfall? Or how are we going to make an explosion?
So were there specific things that you found easier to grasp than others? So obviously, like you used a waterfall as opposed to, say, a gun. You know, like how long did it take you to really pick up some of the more used things, like probably weaponry, because that's in a lot of games, as opposed to some weird, obscure object or thing or alien of some sort? Yeah.
I think, a lot of artists usually end up sort of picking particular things. Like I've gone towards like doing more environment art than characters. So I find it a lot more enjoyable and interesting to make sort of hard surface ones. So sort of making, you know, houses and things like that rather than organic like people or animals.
Right, I see. So do you do a lot of traveling and kind of take pictures, obviously, but a mental note as well, as if you were to try and take that and put it into an environment within a game? Yeah,
I'm constantly like looking at things. Like as soon as I go outside, I'm just like, oh, that's a really cool stick. And you get stuck looking at something for ages. I'll take a lot of photos of like interesting textures as well, like, you know, tree bark or some like metal that's gone all rusted. You're like, oh, how would I recreate that? That's really cool. Right. Sort of build up a bit of a library.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, say, for example, Australia has a lot of desert. So if you were going to make some desert-like environment, you could just reference the Outback, I suppose, if you go out that way.
You could, yeah. It's a bit of a distance from here.
Yeah, a bit of a mission from where you are. And yeah, it would be, I mean, I wouldn't want to drive through there because if you break down or something, then you're kind of screwed, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't want to go out there. I'm near a lot of forest here, which is really nice. There's a lot of forest and rivers nearby.
Yeah. So do you go out and just with a camera and kind of incorporate, say, a holiday or traveling into it, but you're actually going out there for work-based stuff?
Yeah, all the time. Like I will go and take photos, even over New Year's. I was out camping, but I took a sketchbook with me, so I'd just be sitting down like sketching trees and just sort of like just looking at details and just sort of taking it in.
So you must have a massive filing cabinet or something of all your sketches and work that you've done that you can reference. Well, yeah, there's stuff behind you.
Pretty much all this cupboard behind me is just like full of like drawings and sketches and things. So
what's some of that? What's it inspired by? What's some of the work behind you?
A lot of the ones on here, I do life drawing.
Right. Oh, cool.
So just to sort of keep my skills up, and it's something really fun as well to do with other artists. So about twice a week, we'll do some life drawing.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, we were doing it online because we couldn't go anywhere. So we have a model posing online, and you in a Zoom room with all the other artists, and we'll draw together. Wouldn't
that be difficult though? Because you're having to, I mean, obviously, the closer you get to a screen, the more pixelated it gets as well. I mean, I don't, particularly if you're doing it via Zoom, because, I mean, I don't know, it depends on the plan, I guess, but it would be 720 or 1080 as opposed to 4K, or seeing it in real life with your own eyes. So is it still easy to do that stuff?
Yeah, a lot of the models had really good equipment at home. So they would have like quite good cameras and lighting. So I found that they were setting up like really good scenes as well. They would do like a whole backdrop and get really into it. And so because I've got 4K screens here, I can see quite well. I've got quite a big screen. So sometimes it's almost like you're closer to the model than if you did go to a live session and you were sitting at the back, like they would be quite far away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't as like it's missing something from being in person, but it was still works really well, I think.
Yeah.
And it was still a good way to connect with people. And I think it kept me sane during the lockdowns, really.
Yeah, fair enough too. Yeah, because you guys were in a lockdown for quite a long time.
Oh, man, it was almost 2 years. There was a lot of Zoom.
Yeah. I bet. And a lot of sketches. Yeah.
Yeah, so I ended up, doing that a couple of times a week.
Support for this episode of Kiwi Talks is brought to you by Manscaped, who offer precision engineering tools for your family jewels. And they just launched their newest product, the 4th generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0, the best sleek optimized trimmer. It's waterproof, reduces ingrown hairs, and if some idiot drives into a power transformer and the power goes out, 4K LED light, baby, 4K LED light, so you can still perform those groin duties even in the dark. And on top of that, we also have the Weed Whacker. Have you ever been talking to someone and noticed, they've got a really long hair coming out of their nostril? You won't have to have that problem because you can get all up in there with this. Get all up in those nostrils and even in the ears as well. This great product, the Weed Whacker, this great product, the Lawnmower, are available at manscaped.com. So all you need to do is go to manscaped.com and use the code KiwiTalks for 20% off plus free shipping. So with character models, what do you find the hardest to draw when you're drawing a character? Because I would think that hands might be one of the hardest.
Yeah, hands are real tricky. I think, the more drawing I do, I just try and focus on the bits that I get stuck on each time. Like I was stuck on hands for a long time, so I would just spend time drawing them and trying to focus on that. For me now, it's feet.
Right. So
feet are just a weird shape. It's just like you draw them and it's just like it doesn't look right. What is that?
So can you go to your manager or director or whoever, your leader, and be like, hey, can we give this person shoes instead?
Yeah, you just kind of work around it. Like, yeah.
So is it when you say feet, is it the toes or just the actual weird shape that feet usually are?
Yeah, just trying to get them right. Like, because even when you get them right, there's something just odd looking about them, right? You're just like, is that right? Like, yeah.
And of course you're having to sculpt it as well, and the way it lands on the ground and its movement, I suppose, as well. Yeah. So in terms of the sculpting aspect, how long would something like that take? Just moving a foot from here to here. How long does that usually take?
Like in the animation, or
yeah. So if you were trying to create a movement of just this, like when you're animating a character, how long would that take? Just a slight little movement.
If you already had like the character all rigged up, it wouldn't take very long.
Yeah.
So once a character model has been finished, then it's goes into the rigging process, which is when you put a skeleton inside the model.
Yeah.
So then that skeleton will be able to drive the movement. So you can move the different bones and then keyframe them at different stages to make the animation.
Right. And is that just a simple matter of, well, it's not a simple matter, I'm sure. But
that's not a simple one.
Nothing simple with artistry. Moving like the vertices and just the actual object itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so It's getting more into like I don't do animation myself. It's more sort of specialized to people that just do animation.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the actual process of just being able to move something like, say, having all the vertices of the, say, a hand connected to this hand bone, just being able to move it, that's super simple. That's really quick. You can just rotate it and be like, oh, hand moves. But then the really long process is making it look believable. So like an animator will go through and usually they might have motion capture data, like from an actor who's acted out that whole scene, or you have to go through by hand and be like, okay, so I want to move it from here to here, but I want it to look nice and flowing. So I'm going to get that right. Or yeah, it could be quite tricky if you just move it, it'll look wrong, right? So yeah, you've got to spend that time.
That must be so cool.
Making it believable, I guess.
Yeah, it must be so cool though. Like you do a drawing or of some kind, and then you see the final result later on once it's gone through the various different people. Like you must hand it off. Well, probably not so much these days because you're doing more management now, right? You're managing. Yeah. But when you used to, you'd hand it off to someone, and then they'd take your original creation and make it blossom.
Yeah, so I love that stage. Like even just when you see the first animation put on a character of them breathing, like just like an idle, where they just be sort of moving. It's like, wow, they're alive. Like, that was just nothing before. It was just like,
yeah. So do you have a specific project that you like the most? That you personally enjoyed the most?
I think, like the commercial projects that I've worked on, I really enjoyed Age of Empires.
Was there a specific reason?
It was the biggest title that I'd worked on so far, I think. Like Zelda was pretty big, but then with Age of Empires, we've got the opportunity to just completely revamp it. So it's the same game, but we got to make the art look really good. So instead of just updating just the textures, it was like take everything and redo it from scratch. And that I felt we could really push the art then. It was really fun.
Yeah. Because is that more up to the original developer? They ask for that? Like with Age of Empires, they asked for that? Or did you pitch to do that?
Yeah, it was both. So yeah, Microsoft sort of came to us saying like, so what's your ideas? And we put together a pitch for that. We were using just Unreal Engine to do the pitch. We just did like a scene of like here's a bunch of like military characters and some horses and made a little scene and did a side-by-side of the old game.
Right.
So we picked like the same scenario. So we set up like here's some horses and guys next to a river. And here's what we could do. So we put like lots of fancy shaders on it, made the textures look really good, really nice lighting. And that was our pitch to them saying, if you let us do this, we'll make the game look like that.
Wow.
Okay.
And how long was the development for that, Age of Empires?
It's still going. I'm still on it now. It's funny, I've actually gone off to another job for a year and come back and I'm back on it again.
And you're back on it again.
Yeah. So the initial one, it's probably 2 years, I think, for the main development. And then now it's in like DLCs and updates and things like that. So it's just like sort of constantly rolling now.
Yeah. Fair enough. Because that's a completely different process, right? Age of Empires to say Zelda Twilight Princess, where you're revamping the whole thing. Yeah. So it must be more exciting because there's so much more for you to do.
Yeah, there's a lot more to do, and you can use a lot of like modern techniques as well. You don't have to rely on things that you were doing 10 years ago. It's like, we can really push things now. You can get like the specular looking right. So like the metal and the helmets, you can get them looking nice and shiny, or things like that. We can have actual grass, like we had like moving grass in there. The original was just like flat green.
Yeah. So do you watch like a lot of behind the scenes footage of say visual effects companies or anything as well to kind of get inspiration? I mean, this stuff changes from year to year. as you said, because the industry is constantly changing, and with Unreal Engine 5 and Unity, for example. So it must be so hard to stay on top of everything.
Yeah, there's a lot of info out there. It is, yeah, it takes a lot of time, I think. Like, yeah, I watch a lot of making ofs, a lot of making of film as well as games, like just to sort of see people's different process. And he's a YouTube. I really like watching docos of film studios. Like there was No Clip.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Yeah, I found them really interesting just to see like what's it actually like in another studio? How do they deal with things? And
yeah, I mean, I've talked to quite a few people off air and a number of other developers, and it just seems, every studio is different. It might be structured very differently, and you have to be able to, I suppose, adapt to that work environment. I mean, I'd imagine that an Australian studio would be very different to an American studio, just based on different cultures, and then you add in the actual different programs and methods that they use. Yeah, but you said you went and then you came back. Was the process different when you moved between studios?
yeah, I find pretty much all studios have been really different. A lot of it just depends on the personalities there, how many people. Like there'd be so many different factors. Like I imagine there's probably a lot of similarities between companies here and in the States as well. It's probably just bigger. There's probably just more people. A lot of the ones in Melbourne. I'm trying to think. Like we've got some bigger ones here. Like we've just had Sledgehammer. Have just started up here. But yeah, it's been a lot of small companies here. You probably have like ones that have got like 50 people would sort of be the biggest.
That's changing though, isn't it? I mean, from what I can see, it seems like a lot of the industry is moving into Australia, both in video games and film, as well.
Yeah, film. Because I worked in film for a while as well, making props. So I've sort of had a lot of experience there as well. Australia, it really fluctuates. Like a lot of it depends on the dollar as well. Like when it's cheaper to make things here, a lot of projects will get brought here. So we'll get a lot of outsourcing in games, or we'll get like a lot of companies want to make movies here. Like Marvel just made a whole bunch here up in Queensland.
So that's the reason for it, right?
Yeah, so people are sort of always looking around for like, there's a really good team there and it's cheap, so we'll go there. Or it's also the tax offset has just come in for games here, which will hopefully be able to help a lot of companies grow here as well. It means that the government can give back 30% to film and games. Sort of encourage like the industry here a bit more.
Yeah, so it can prosper.
Yeah.
Has it been difficult to find staff though because of the pandemic? I mean, Melbourne was in lockdown for 2 years, so trying to recruit people would be difficult, I'm sure.
Yeah, I spent the last year online. Like I think we're kind of lucky that it's a job that we can keep doing online. So I was actually recruiting a lot. Like I joined that company online, so I didn't actually meet a lot of people. It was all just by Zoom, and I was also recruiting the same way. So I'd have Zoom interviews with people, and and have to onboard them to the company the same way, like just like through Zoom.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, it makes it tricky, but there was no shortage of talent here. I think we were probably the other way around. It's like it'd be good if there was more jobs around for people here that are looking.
Yeah, but like say if you needed a specific expertise that maybe was not available in Australia and you needed to hire someone from overseas, that would become quite difficult, wouldn't it? I mean, that's that's just pretty much the motto here in New Zealand. But I thought I understood that it was quite similar in Australia as well in terms of getting people through, particularly when the borders were closed. I'm not sure what the story is now.
Yeah, it's still pretty tricky to travel here.
Yeah.
So the company that I'm at now is really close. I'm only like 20 minutes away, so it's really easy.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah. So I've been going back into the office just in the last month. But yeah, there's a lot of companies here that are still online. Like a lot of people are still a bit worried about traveling and being in big groups of people. So they'll do like a couple of days in the office and a couple at home. Or like EA has offices here. They're still all at home. Everyone's still remote.
Wow. Okay. Because now that you're more into a management type role, what is the most common mistake you think that you see with things that artists do?
Most common mistake. I guess a lot of it now is just about time management. So it's sort of games will be on a very sort of tight schedule. There's a lot of things you've got to try and get done in a very short time. So it's just sort of like making sure that people can do those tasks in that time that they're being given to a good quality.
Yeah, well, that's always the big problem, isn't it? Time management, particularly when you don't know how long stuff is going to take and curveballs being thrown at you all the time, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And a pandemic as well. So I suppose that changes the game quite dramatically.
It sure does, yeah. And there's just, I think, like just a lot of different things to juggle. Because like once you're at the management stage, you're sort of bringing all those pieces together. So rather than just working on like, oh, I'm just making this thing and then I hand it over here and someone does the rest. Now it's like, oh, I'm putting all those pieces together and talking to everyone and making sure that it can all line up.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's interesting stuff.
So sort of, yeah, depending on the size of the company, you know, like you might have a meeting with the animators to find out what's going on there, and then you go and talk to someone else, and like, yeah, so you're passing a lot of information and making sure that once that task is done, it can roll on to the next person, you know, so you don't have people waiting or stuck, you know.
Yeah, well, you'd probably want to make sure that there's not one person that can do one thing, because otherwise if something happens to that person, then what happens? There's no one to do the specific task, right? So
yeah, which makes it really tricky
control
in the small companies, because you're like, well, we don't have much choice. There's only like, you know, 2 people. You're the one that does that. So.
Yeah. So how do you negate that problem?
Yeah, in the smaller companies, you just have to have people that have a bit more generalist. So they sort of like know a few more different skills.
Yeah.
Well,
I suppose, yeah, that's vital, I guess. Otherwise, the whole gaming development would just stall.
Yeah.
Reach a standstill until that person was available. Yeah. So at this point in time, is there anything you haven't done in the industry or things that you haven't learned that you'd like to learn or do?
Probably heaps. I think, yeah, I'm like constantly learning. Like being pretty new to management, it's only been a couple of years. I think I'd still consider that pretty new. Like I'm constantly watching talks of other people, and be good to just sort of really push that. I never used to be able to talk in front of people very well either. I used to be quite shy, and so I'm always
really,
yeah.
Don't get that at all.
Probably couldn't have done this a year ago. You know, it was just that like shy artist hiding in the corner. So it's just, yeah, sort of pushing my sort of people management skills a lot and learning a lot about the industry. I'd love to travel as well. It'd be great to be able to work at some companies overseas.
Yeah, hopefully this pandemic's over soon.
Yeah.
So it makes it more feasible.
Yeah, it's like, I don't think I'll be traveling for a while, but yeah, it's one of those things. It's like, if the world like settled down a bit, it would be really nice. Like, yeah, I'd love to go learn from different people. And
yeah. Is there a specific gaming franchise you'd like to work on?
No, I think I just really want the experience of like just sort of different types of games and like see how different studios work. Like going to Europe would be really interesting, I think. So just sort of been researching some different companies over there, like and like, oh, you know, what's it like over there, you know?
Yeah. Is it because I would think there's a lot of movement between artists on a game, right? So they might work at one studio on one game and then they'll move to another studio and that's what they kind of do. Or is it common for an artist to stay at one specific studio?
Yeah, it's usually pretty common to stay. Like, yeah, once people are happy, they're sort of like, yeah, I'm just gonna
coast this. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I know what I'm doing. People are good. Staying here. Like, yeah.
I suppose, yeah, it makes it easier, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, people usually only move if it's like, yeah, there's something that's sort of really not working or not gelling, then yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, I will wrap up there. This has been great. Thanks for taking time out and chatting. If anyone wants to keep up to date with any work that you're doing, is there anywhere they can do that?
LinkedIn is good. And I put personal stuff on Instagram, like drawings and things like that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Is that daily?
Daily?
Daily, do you post up?
Maybe every couple of days.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Nice. What's the longest part, like coloring or the actual drawing itself, in terms of those two aspects?
That does change a lot. Probably the painting. I think the sketches are usually quite quick, and then you spend a lot of time refining the sort of painting and making like all the polish and all the final details.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. I feel like I've gained a lot of knowledge and I could become an artist now.
It's just many hours of practice. Easy,
yeah.
Right? Just constantly practice.
Repetition. There you go. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, that is the show, everyone. Make sure you share, like, and subscribe. And until next time, stay safe.